Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we're going to be doing an election prediction between Walter Mondale and Donald Trump. So most of you probably know who Donald Trump is, but if you don't know who Walter Mondale is, I wouldn't blame you. He's a Democrat from decades ago who ran against Ronald Reagan sometime during the 80s. I don't remember the exact year, but he lost in a landslide to Ronald Reagan. He only won one state, his home state of Minnesota, and Washington, D.C. The rest of the 49 states went to Ronald Reagan. So that's what he's mostly known for. Other than that, he was the senator from Minnesota, and he was also the vice president to Jimmy Carter. So currently he's, I think, almost in his 90s. He's very old, and he is a very unknown name throughout the United States. So that's going to be one thing that's not going to work very well for him, is his complete and total lack of name recognition, and the fact that he represents a very old and very outdated form of the Democratic Party, where they were essentially just Republicans. I mean, Walter Mondale essentially probably has the same political ideology of Mitt Romney or John McCain, probably. He's essentially a Republican on the Democratic side. He's a very conservative Democrat, to put it lightly. So let's just get right into it. Overall, I think that Walter Mondale would do very poorly in such an election. The only states... Actually, I'll give him Washington as well, but I'm not going to give him Oregon. California and Washington, I would give safely in Walter Mondale's column. As you'll see me filling in safe states and likely states, you'll notice that there are a few places that I will not fill in safe or toss up at all. From Mondale, for example, Nebraska's 2nd district, I would not consider competitive in this race. Illinois, I would consider competitive in this race. I don't think it would be safe. New York, however, I consider safe. Rhode Island, I guess I would consider safe. Connecticut, I would not consider safe. New Jersey, I would not consider safe. The rest of the Northeast, I would consider safe. Of course, neglecting these two areas, which I won't fill in at all. None of the areas of Maine, and certainly not New Hampshire. And Texas, I would also consider safe in Donald Trump's column in the case of this election. And Georgia as well. Oh, and of course, Indiana, which I'd consider safe in pretty much any other election prediction. So already we see that Donald Trump has a definitive advantage in such a prediction. So Oregon, I'd still call in Walter Mondale's column. Obviously, that state does have a pretty definitive Democratic identity, so it's kind of hard for it to go to Donald Trump in any election scenario. Same with Illinois, just as a result of Chicago and the state's Democratic roots in general, it would be likely in Mondale's column. The only reason Donald Trump would have a chance at states like Illinois, Oregon, Connecticut, New Jersey is because Mondale is a very old, very conservative Democrat, who would not campaign very well, and did not campaign very well even when he was well known, back when he went up against Ronald Reagan. And just to clarify, part of the reason why Walter Mondale lost in such a landslide against Ronald Reagan wasn't necessarily because he was unapproved of, but because Ronald Reagan was at the height of his political career at that point. The economy was booming. He had a record high approval of any president. So it probably would have been very difficult for any Democrat to make any significant ground against him. And Walter Mondale really got destroyed in that election. And then same argument for these two states. I would list Connecticut and New Jersey as likely in Mondale's column. North Carolina, I'd consider likely in Trump's column. This state, I really don't see going to Walter Mondale. I think Walter Mondale's best shot if he somehow wound up being the candidate for the Democrats in 2020. And just to clarify, Walter Mondale has not declared that he wants to run in 2020. This is entirely hypothetical. The Democrats would be making a horrible decision by nominating Walter Mondale as their candidate. But if he was the candidate, his best shot at winning would be to appeal to states like Arizona, Utah, even North Carolina, where there's a lot of moderate Republicans who maybe don't see eye to eye with Trump and would see more eye to eye with Mondale, since Mondale is essentially a moderate Republican in all but name. So that'd be his best shot, but I doubt that would work entirely in his favor. Iowa would also consider likely in Trump's column. I don't see Walter Mondale and his poor name recognition doing very well in a state like Iowa, especially since Trump won it by a pretty safe margin back in 2016. And his approval is down in this state, Trump's approval, but I won't be considering that too much for this election prediction, just because it's Walter Mondale, and I doubt he would win in a state like Iowa. Again, his only shot at winning states like Iowa, like North Carolina, like Arizona, where there are a lot of moderate Republicans, is to appeal directly to them, but even then that's unlikely. Maine's second I consider likely, if not solid, in Trump's column. I'm just saying likely, mostly because Trump's approval went down again in this state if we're looking at approval ratings. Arizona I'd also consider likely. Sorry about that. I'd also consider likely for Trump. Like I said before, Walter Mondale's best shot at winning in Arizona is to really drive out moderate Republicans, which, again, is unlikely. He would have to completely write the Democratic campaigning playbook in order to do that, which, again, is also unlikely. And Minnesota, I'd also consider likely for Mondale, and this is just because this is his home state, and I'm leaning on making it a lean, but still, it's his home state. I think that he could. This state is already pretty Democratic in general, and with those two things in mind, I think you can list this state as likely in Mondale's column. But now we're getting into the competitive states, or the more competitive states, and that would be Virginia. I'd list this as a lean in Mondale's column, just because the state does have a Democratic identity and a handful of moderate Republicans that Mondale could pull over. But he'd have no minority. One major disadvantage for Mondale as well is his complete and total lack of minority appeal. I know that's a term I use very often when describing races for very poor Democrats in general, but that's really what makes Mondale at least a very poor candidate, is his lack of minority appeal, his lack of appeal to progressive as well, since he's essentially a moderate Republican in all but name, as I said. So Virginia would be a lean. Ohio would be. I'm tempted to make it likely in Trump's column, which I think I will. I originally made this a lean for Trump, but still, name recognition is a big factor, especially when you're campaigning against Donald Trump. Mondale has none, and in Ohio you also need minority turnout. Mondale will have none, and you also need to have a significant amount of progressive appeal. Mondale has none. It'd be a pretty safe race for Trump in Ohio, I'd say, so for that reason make it likely. New Mexico, I'd call us a narrow lean in Mondale's column. I think that Trump could very well take the state against Mondale, but the only reason why I'm giving it narrowly to Mondale is because this state does have a definitive Democratic identity, and it does have a very negative approval of Donald Trump, at least currently. So for those two reasons, I would list it as a lean in Mondale's column. As for Nevada, however, I listed a lean in Trump's column, and this is because there is there's a Trump base in Nevada. I know that isn't reflected in approval polls, but there's a pretty strong Trump base in Nevada, and if Mondale is the candidate, they would all go to Trump. Mondale would not be able to peel away at that Trump base. He could appeal over moderate Republicans in Nevada, but that would not be a winning factor for Mondale. So for that reason, Nevada would be a narrow lean in Trump's column. New Hampshire would also be a lean in Trump's column. Mondale has virtually no appeal to voters up here. He could hypothetically pull over moderate Republicans, which could make the state more competitive, but still, if the Democrats nominate someone like Mondale, the Democratic base will definitely respond very poorly, and there'll be a huge lack of turnout throughout registered Democrats in New Hampshire, which would ultimately hand Trump the victory in that state. As for the rest of Maine, I consider the 1st District a narrow lean in Mondale's column for the same reason that I consider New Hampshire. Well, not the same reason, obviously, since it's two different states. But, the 1st District does have a Democratic identity in Maine, but still, it could very well go over to Trump if Mondale's candidate, but still, it's a very hard call to make. Making calls for individual congressional districts is always very hard. And as for Maine's 2 electoral votes, I consider that a lean in Trump's column. I think that Trump could very easily take the entire state of Maine at large. Going over to Colorado, I consider this a lean in Trump's column, and this is because Mondale does not have a tremendous amount of appeal to voters in Colorado, which are predominantly progressive and prioritize around certain issues that Mondale does not have good appeal in, and his lack of Latino appeal would also be a big devastating factor for him in a state like Colorado, which would hand Trump the victory overall. Wisconsin, I'd give to Trump, and I'd give Michigan to Trump as well, and that makes him that gives him a second term in this hypothetical 2020 election prediction. And the reason for these 2 states is because Mondale has very little appeal, And in order to win, I've said this before about the Rust Belt, in order to win in the Rust Belt, you have to have great white, affluent, suburban, middle-class appeal. And Mondale could have good appeal amongst moderate Republicans who are in suburban areas, but again, that's not a winning factor. And Trump could repeat the same strategy he did in 2016, which was just showing off to Rust Belt voters that he can shake things up, and continue to shake things up, compared to Mondale, who absolutely would not be able to do that. So those two states I consider a lean in Trump's column. Florida I consider a lean in Trump's column. This is mostly just because of Mondale's lack of Hispanic appeal, which would, or his complete and total lack of minority appeal overall. Mondale's really only redeeming quality when it comes from an electorate perspective is his ability to turn out moderate Republicans on his side. But when you consider the lack of Democratic turnout in general, the lack of minority turnout, and you just consider that one pro that he can get some moderate Republican votes, it's not a winning strategy, and that really manifests itself in Florida especially. And then Pennsylvania, I'd also put a lean towards Trump, and this comes down to similar reasons to Florida. He really would only be able to appeal to moderate Republicans. He would not have good Democratic turnout on his side, and Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Trump base would probably turn out en masse for Trump as well. And alright, so this is the electoral map. Trump wins with an even larger margin than he did in 2016 against Walter Mondale, which makes perfect sense. There's very little chance at Mondale winning against Trump, as you can see by this bar right here. He has potential to win in states like Michigan, maybe even Colorado, maybe Nevada, but even then, I doubt he'd win all of those states, and even if he did, he wouldn't be at 270, so virtually no chance at Mondale winning against Trump or any Republican in general. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I plan to make another one soon after this. I've gotten a lot of suggestions in the past 24 hours, so I want to start putting out those videos soon. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. It's the only way for small channels like mine to grow, and it'd be very much appreciated. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.